Hello, everybody. This is NGO Soul Strategy, and this is Tosca. Today is kind of a special episode for me because I am going to talk with the CEO of an organization where I'm on the board, and that is not too often in our episodes. So I have been one of Cadasta's board members for about 5 years. I'm almost at the end of my second term, actually. Cadasta and Amy is going to talk much more about this, but I'm going to summarize it now. Cadasta is a US-based global leading social innovation organization that is dedicated to providing land technology, training, and technical services to communities and governments so that they can affordably and easily document, map, secure, and sustain inclusive land and resource rights at a scale for a more sustainable and equitable planet. So that's a big mouthful. Amy's going to talk about it in a moment. And Cadasta, and this is one of the reasons why I joined the board, is an interesting mix between a social innovator, a technology provider, and we'll go deeper into that, and a global NGO focused on local community approaches to solving land tenure problems. I felt like it was a rewarding idea to interview Amy, the CEO, towards the end of my board term to allow her to look back on her 6 years plus leadership of this somewhat atypical type of INGO, and we'll come back to this. Listeners, you will hear that we're going to pivot a few times in this podcast, since Amy and I explicitly want to discuss three dimensions that are very timely right now. One is we're going to talk about the risks and rewards of a technology-forward organization. Two, what does it mean to be an ally organization to Indigenous peoples-led land tenure groups from an organizational stance, if you will? What does that mean? What does that look like? And three, right now, many nonprofits and NGOs in both Europe and the US are going through very challenging downward trends in the funding landscape and outright upheaval. How do organizations need to respond to this, and what new opportunities does this perhaps also enable? So you'll hear us pivot. And with that long introduction, Amy Coughenour Betancourt, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Tosca. It's such a pleasure. And as you said, it's a special pleasure having you on our board and having this conversation today. I have to say, Tosca, that as an early stage organization, when I came in over 6.5 years ago, one of the key sort of board capacities that we needed was somebody who was strong on governance and organizational development and leadership. And so you have just filled that role for us so beautifully and so competently. And I've learned a lot from you, and I really appreciate your service to our board.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. So, dear listeners, a quick bio on Amy. She is obviously the president and CEO of Cadasta. She also is a global advisor of an organization called How Women Lead. And Amy, I need to talk to you offline about that. I'm curious. She has been an advisory board member of Geospatial World. And again, we're using terms here that I too, as a board member, was not at all exposed to when I joined 5-6 years ago. She has been a member of the board of Interaction, the US umbrella organization for INGOs. She and I, in fact, overlapped on that board for a while. She was the CEO of an organization with a very long name, the National Cooperative Business Association, and particularly of the international component of that, so NCBA CLUSA. She was the deputy ED of the Pan American Development Foundation and a number of other roles that Amy has played. Okay, so Amy, let's dive in first about Cadasta, right, to ground ourselves. Cadasta works at the intersection of social innovation, technology, and land rights, land tenure and land rights. So let's make it very concrete first around land tenure and land rights. What's the core mission of Cadasta and what inspired its creation?
Thanks, Tosca. Yeah, Cadasta is an intersection between all of that. And I think coming out of a more traditional INGO in the food security and agricultural space, it was a natural transition into land, although I have to say I had a lot to learn about the land sector, particularly land administration, which is a whole world unto itself about how countries administer and allocate and manage their land, which is a really critical function of a country government. And also how local people manage the land and what the implications of that are. So it was a big learning curve. We were created actually, it's our 10th anniversary. I wanted to also mention that. This year is
Oh,
2025. We were created in 2015. So it's a big milestone for us this year. And it is very timely to look back at 10 years, and I've been here for a little over 6.5 of those, almost 7, to look back on those years and sort of, you know, think about the evolution of the organization, what we've learned, what kind of
a lot.
achievements we've had, where we've struggled, and then, use that as kind of a benchmark for how we look forward and where we want to go in the future. So it is
Right.
time. So 10 years ago, some leaders in the land sector created Cadasta to help solve a pressing global problem, which is the failure of public good in many countries to provide equitable land and property rights. Essentially, many people living on land to which they have no formal documentation or legal title, which creates a lot of land tenure insecurity. And
Mm.
so specifically, this group of leaders out of the land sector, land administration sector, along with some technologists, wanted to address gaps around the lack of data on who lives where. What is the relationship of those people to that land? Do they have a tenure relationship? In other words, is there any kind of documentation? In most cases, there is not. In developing economies, there is a World Bank figure from several years ago that said 70% of land in these emerging economies is unregistered, which is a
Mm.
pretty astounding figure. And
Very
so,
high.
yeah, in order to address land tenure, we have to address the fact that there's no data. There's very little data out there on who lives where, as well as lack of technology access of communities and even governments, training on how to use technology to do mapping and documentation of land, and also overall how to bridge the gap between communities and what they're doing around tenure rights, what they're doing around land management, and governments, who are the only ones who can actually formalize legal land rights. So
Yes.
those were the gaps that Cadasta was created to address. A lot of NGOs were out there focused on land tenure rights, a lot of excellent work being done at the policy level, a lot of work being done around legal frameworks in countries trying to change land laws. But one of the big pieces that was missing is supporting communities and governments in implementing these titling programs, implementing programs to collect this data at scale in order to be able to formalize rights.
Right. And just before we continue to make it really hyper concrete, we're talking here because again, for me too, as a board member, it was a totally unknown sector, right? But we're talking about land or other resources that can be urban, not only rural, not only agriculture, and it also concerns, for instance, the land that is managed by Indigenous peoples, right? And customary rights that they hold, etc., or that they want to claim, right? Because they're, as board members, you recall, I used to, in the earliest, particularly be interested in what is the bridge? Are we actually building a bridge between not just documenting land rights, but also claiming them from local government or national government, right? But anyway, so it's land and other resources in all these different areas within a country, correct?
Yeah, and Yes, and I think what we're really focused on as an organization is that it's more than 1 billion people who don't have legal titles to their land and or feel insecure about losing their land. For example, being evicted or forced out, um, having their land be encroached upon, polluted, basically taken away from them. And so, as you said, that could be informal urban settlements, it could be smallholder farms, it could be grazing areas of pastoralists or indigenous territories, for example. And
Got it.
the reason why this is so critical is because land and property rights are really foundational to peaceful and prosperous societies. So when people have more secure land tenure, it reduces conflict. It helps people feel more secure about accessing credit, or investing in their land and businesses. And there's even research that shows that in households that have secure land tenure rights, that there is improved food security and nutrition and improved educational outcomes. So
Interesting.
land is kind of this missing or unrecognized piece a lot of times that is really foundational to a lot of the economic, social, and environmental programming and desired outcomes that we have for these families and communities and that they have for themselves. So
Right. And
without
then
land
there's
rights, it's difficult to achieve those other outcomes.
got it. Got it. Yeah. And I want to move soon now towards what it means to lead a technology-enabled organization. But two quick questions to finish up this part. One is there's a social dimension. We mentioned Indigenous peoples vis-a-vis majority populations and inequities. Gender is another. Can you just briefly talk about what the gender dimension is? And then I'd love you to immediately move on to just give listeners in a few sentences an idea of what kind of technology Cadasta offers and facilitates and trains in, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question about the gender piece. Yeah, so women in these contexts in emerging economies, particularly in rural and customary areas where customary practices are relevant and being practiced at the local level, women have much less land ownership than men. Even though in some countries they form over 50% of an agricultural workforce, they have much they have very little ownership of land. And the research also shows that when women have secure land tenure rights, or they are part of a household, they are named on a title or some kind of land document formally, that it improves their decision making. It empowers them around decisions around
Mm.
investments in land, for example. It increases incomes, and again, it improves the well-being of the whole family. Because when
That's it.
women have more decision making power in the household, they have more power to allocate resources to education, health, nutrition, and all the other things. So um, women's land ownership has been a big theme in our work and in the work of the land sector in general, because it has a profound impact on the well-being of families and communities.
Yeah, yeah, right. The technology piece. So briefly, what does Cadasta offer when it comes to technology? Because then we're going to go deeper into what that means, the risk and rewards of a technology enabling organization.
Yeah, so um, I want to start the answer by saying that when I first came into Cadasta in its first 2.5, 3 years, Cadasta was created originally to build out software, to build out a mapping platform that people could access and use for free in the field, and that, if it were available, then people could map their own rights. In fact, I think the actual incorporated name at the time was Map My Rights. Then it got changed later. And Cadasta refers to cadastral systems, which is the land. And so early on, the idea was to build out a new mapping platform. And so the team was a team of software developers. And so I won't go into all of that history, but basically, right before I joined in 2018, there was a decision made by the board at that time to, rather than continue to put resources into building out mapping technology, which was going to take a lot more money, time, and effort to be able to build out a really quality product that would meet the needs of communities in the field, around our partners and communities in the field. They decided to focus on commercially available technology, off-the-shelf technology. And the technology that we're talking about is geographic information system, so GIS technology, that allows communities to map boundaries of parcels or fields, so parcel boundaries, to collect information, geospatial information about the location of that boundary, that land. It also includes technology to conduct household level surveys to collect social demographic information so that you can link the geospatial parcel data with the household the attribute data. So the information that we need to know about that land. What type of land is it? How is it being held? And then the demographic information associated with that household or that community. So these are tools that include mobile data collection tools that can be used offline in very disconnected environments, as well as desktop tools that can do things like we can use them to create dashboards. We can use them to monitor operations that are going on in the field in real time. We can also, there are data analysis tools as well as storytelling tools. So a tool called Story Maps. And the type of technology that we use is made by a company called Esri. Esri is a state-of-the-art, world-class software for GIS. And so that is the stack that we use. And we use the suite of tools configured to the needs of the work in the land sector and configured to the needs of our partners in the field.
If it's the partners, you're training the partners, right, to use this technology. And this is your global staff, right? You have a globally dispersed staff, and they train partners in order to work with communities to apply the technology. Am I saying that right?
Yes, that is right. Because one of the big things I think, when I came into Cadasta was there was a very, very heavy emphasis on the technology and building up the technology. And there was very little emphasis on training and upskilling and supporting our partners in the field. And our partners include anything from grassroots organizations to national level NGOs to, in some cases, INGOs, and as well as some government agencies as well. And so, focusing on technology when you're doing a software build out is very logical. But once we made that shift to using available technology, one of the big pieces was our services. How do we needed to be able to deliver high quality training with sort of a standardized training modules and formats that partners could use, and that our team would deliver, and then also technical assistance. For example, some partners might have had a lot of data that they've already mapped using other tools, but they wanted to bring it all into an integrated suite and be able to visualize it on the platform. And so data migration would be an example of one of those services where we would help them do that. So we
Got
really
it.
shifted our focus to, okay, yes, we're deploying technology, but the real piece is delivering training and services directly to our partners. And then also we added the piece around financial support as well.
Got
Small
it. Got it.
grants.
Yeah, small grants, yes. And just a quick comment, and then I'll move into my next question is I when you said, we moved from developing our own custom software to off the shelf, right? Made me think of a podcast conversation I had in this very podcast with an innovation coach who said a lot of INGOs in his experience are focus way too much on custom building an app or some other piece of tech for them instead of taking something that's off the shelf and tweaking it slightly for their purposes if need be, and how that is both inefficient and often leads to endless tech design projects that never come to fruition and are very inefficient. So I was just struck by what you said. So let me move to the topic now, more of an organizational development lens, if you will. Let's talk about Cadasta, a tech-enabled nonprofit. Being that type of organization brings both opportunities and risks and rewards, right? When you lead an organization like this, what are the rewards of leaning in heavily into the use of technology, and what are the risks, both for Cadasta, but most importantly for the people that it serves?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tosca. So one of the first things for me is to say that, coming into Cadasta, I am not a technology expert. That was not my area of expertise when I started at Cadasta. So as the CEO, it was a huge learning curve for me. First of all, to understand the software development business and how that worked, um, and how the need for human centered design and responding to the needs of your clients, your partners in the field, your users, so that technology is responsive to that. So that was kind of the early days of my tenure there. But as we started to move into the Esri environment, you know, part of that is really looking and asking the question, as a non-technology person, the question for me always is, what is the rationale for deploying technology to solve this problem? And, are there other ways to solve the problems that we need to consider that's beyond the technology? So to my point earlier, sure, the technology is a key piece to map and document and secure land rights. When I say secure, I'm talking about submitting claims to the government using accurate standards-based data that they will accept for land claims. So what can we do beyond technology to solve the problem? Well, the training piece is a great example of that. So we had to really think about, okay, how do we become a world-class training organization? How do we take our GIS team, our staff who are technical folks and know GIS systems and know how to deploy that and turn them into trainers, for example. How do we build their
Right.
training skills? How do we
Very
build out
different skills.
exactly? How do we build out training curriculum that is contextual and delivered in local languages, but still covers the technical content? Um, so these are some of the questions and some of the learning that I had to do, and we did together as a team to kind of to to really focus on the technology plus. It's always got to be technology plus. Technology is not a panacea. And
No.
and the other piece there is, you know, I also had to understand the debates in the technology space around the difference between open source technologies, as you were referring to earlier, which is building out, custom technology for particular purpose, versus the off the shelf, the proprietary or commercial technology. And so there are very, very robust debates going on about this in the GIS world and in general and with technologists. And that was something I kind of needed to wrap my head around because I had to answer questions. Well, why aren't you using open source, or are you using it? And if not, why not? And what's the difference? And so that was something that was a big learning for me. But with regard to what technology can do for us,
Mm,
what is the purpose of using technology in the land sector? And I would say probably in general is, does it make the work faster? Does it make it more efficient? Is it more cost effective? And does it provide the means to scale a solution? So in the case of the land sector, I mean, the way that people documented and mapped land back in
mm.
the day was literally these metal chains. They would be measured chains, and they would use these chains to measure the distance between one point and another. And then it kind of, evolved into, and then of course there's the survey equipment where there's like the land surveyors use still to this day, that was being deployed, and that's very specialized. And so in the land sector, you had maybe in a country of 10 million people, you might have 26 land surveyors in the Ministry of Land to
Right.
literally map hundreds of millions of hectares of land. Um,
Possible.
it was just an impossible task, and one of the reasons why this sector, the public sector, has failed in great part to extend affordable, inclusive land services. So technology in this case, using, then it went to GPS. There's GPS devices where you can drop points. You stand and you drop a point, and it captures the geospatial information of that point. This technology not only drops points, but it can actually you can walk boundaries. It captures the whole polygon in a fraction of the time. So it speeds up the work, it makes it more efficient, more cost effective. And in the land sector, you cannot map that much land without using technology, and you cannot scale those efforts without using technology. So that's an example of why it was important to have this solution.
Yes. Yes.
So that's, one of the rewards. Another reward that I see is that technology can further localization efforts. What do I mean by that? It
Yeah. Tell me.
allows organizations and communities that we work with to do their own work, to make their own decisions, to design their own projects, and to strengthen their skills and abilities so that they will then carry the work on without us. So that is a big reward of using technology in this case.
Mhm.
I also believe that the technology that we deploy to our partners, uh, train them to use, and I will just clarify, Cadasta does not map the land. We are deploying the technology and giving them the training and the skills and the support for them to map and document their own land. That's the difference. And that is why I say it furthers localization, but it also shifts power. Technology, in this case, is addressing the digital divide. So our partners and the communities that they work with can access the exact same technologies and tools that governments and the private sector are using.
Mm,
It levels the playing field for them. So I'll give
mm,
you an example. Some of the indigenous communities that we work with, let's say in Indonesia. So the Indonesian government uses the same technology stack. By allowing indigenous communities and their partners to use the exact same technology, we level the playing field. And we also make it easier for data to be shared and to be transferred into the relevant government systems in order to formalize and title that land. So that's part
yeah.
of the power shift there. It also, one of the other risks of technology is it if we spend the time, if our partners in Cadasta, we spend the time to really train them on not just how you collect data, but how you understand and use that data. So that means we're building data literacy and data skill sets. So, there have been many, many examples of extractive data collection that happens in communities without their
And there's
consent
also a whole
oftentimes.
graveyard of technology, right? Of
Yeah,
technology interventions also that have not scaled in the past, right?
yes, that is it. And technology, we can talk about the risks and challenges of it in a minute, but I mean, I think these are some of the benefits. And one of them is, yes, empowering people to use and understand their own data. They need to be able to own their data. They need to be able to update it, share it, or they need to be able to keep it private and secure and safe if it's a conflict situation, or they have, for
Mm,
example, indigenous communities with sacred sites or areas that are important to them that they don't want to share with outsiders.
mm,
So we also try to bring understanding through training around how to interpret and use data for decision making. So if you can show, let's say, you can show a map, and then you can show a dashboard next to the map. You click on the map. In that community, you can see the demographic information. You can see how much land has been mapped. You can see what the tenure relationships are. You can see how many women are landholders. You can look at all kinds of data using geospatial technology and these kinds of tools. So empowering folks to understand that and use that data for decision making closes the digital divide.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
I'll just say name one more. I already mentioned scale, but I'm going to mention one more. And that is, and this is an interesting thing that we've noted we've sort of observed in our projects, which is that it facilitates participatory approaches. And you think, well, sometimes technology, you think that that's a divider, that people, oh, we don't know how to use it. But when you bring tools in, and our partners do this, we empower
Mhm.
them as trainers, and they train community mappers and community members to go through this data collection and mapping process. And the reason why I say it facilitates participation is because we're training women and youth community mappers along with men as well. And when you have a woman that shows up to help you, to ask you questions and collect data from your household, it changes the dynamic there with the women in the household, for example.
Yeah.
But also in the survey forms that that our partners are filling out with the community in order to document their land and their homes, the legitimate landholders, you have to ask questions about, what kind of work they do and their demographic, ages and genders and all of that. And so in many contexts, women's land, women do not hold, they're not seen as empowered to legally hold land, or even if there is a legal framework, the practice discriminates against women in land
Right.
ownership. However, if on the form, you can't move to the next question unless you have entered the head of household and the spouse and the family members. It sort of forces the issue around getting women's names on these land titles. So
Mm,
in a lot of ways, if done well and done in participatory ways, it really does facilitate participation and inclusion, in this case of women.
interesting. Interesting. Now let's turn to rewards and let's spend a few minutes on that, and then I want to make that next pivot. So what are the risks? Sorry, I said rewards, but I mean, what are the risks? What are the traps one can fall into when
Yeah.
technology forward as a nonprofit, as an NGO?
Yeah. Well, there's a list. There's definitely a list. I think one of the things, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, is we have to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of technology. We can't, technology is never the sole solution to anything. We can't make technology the panacea or like the main focus of it. It's a means to an end, period. So defining what the end is really important. Are we trying to strengthen tenure security? Are we trying to increase women's land rights? Are we trying to improve agricultural productivity? Are we trying to improve environmental outcomes? So how do we deploy technology to those ends, and really understanding what it can and cannot do? The other big piece is data ownership, access, data sovereignty. So particularly in many of the communities we work in, particularly Indigenous communities, Afro-descendant communities, other local communities that are held by communities, it's not individual land. Data is very sensitive, in some cases, dangerous, particularly in high conflict situations where there's a lot of commercial mining, illegal and commercial mining going on, logging, all kinds of encroachment, wildlife poaching, you name it. Mapping and land data is dangerous. And so the issues around keeping data private and secure, also making sure that the communities own the data. And so Cadasta has a very strong policy around data ownership. We do not own partners' data. We do not share it. We do not sell it. We do not use it unless we have permission. And at any time, partners can take their data out of the platform, and we will help them migrate it to wherever else they want it, whether it's some kind of other platform, or whether it's whatever the case may be. That is a commitment that we make. And a lot of data is lost. There are hundreds of projects out there that collected so much data on people, on projects, on land, on all kinds of things. And when the project closes, the laptop gets lost, the thumb drives, who knows where it is, portable drives get taken. So, working on a platform like Cadasta, using ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Suite, which is what we use, it really provides the benefit of data storage and data security. However, in general, that is always an issue when you're using technology and you're collecting data. So, or people are collecting data. And the other big challenge is sustainability of technology. So as we all know, there is no technology that lasts forever. It is constantly evolving. So you can't go in and say, okay, this is going to be the technology that you're going to use forever, and here you go, one and done. It doesn't work like that. And so, who is going to maintain that technology? Who is going to be responsible for subsequent data collection and data management? How are we going to ensure that the platform or whatever they're using stays up to date? So like updates that are done. How are we going to ensure that once a project is done, that whoever we're working with still has access to their data and still has access to the platform? And so, there's a graveyard of applications and platforms and tools out there that were created in the short term for a particular project. And after the project was over, it was done and the data was lost. I can't tell you how many times that has happened to our partners. They say, oh, we had a project with so-and-so with this funding, and we did all this work, and we don't have any access to that data. So many times. Another really big one is sort of the risks and challenges of technology is, what is the human resource aspect of it? So who is going to, you can't sort of train one person in the organization or in the community on GIS. The minute that person, takes their skills somewhere else, or goes and does something else, or whatever, moves away, that's it, you're done. The capacity just walked out the door. So how do you make sure that you're not only training a lot of people, but you're continually updating those skills? And making sure that you've got some redundancy in the training so that you don't completely lose your capacity. And
Yeah,
then
good.
finally, just I think one of the risks is conflict. And I alluded this to before, the danger around showing up with phones, tablets, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, it can create conflict. And I just want to make a note here that a lot of your listeners may not know, but land defenders globally get criminalized, jailed, and killed every year. It is a tragedy, but it is real. So it's not just all fun and games when you're going out there mapping land. It's serious, and we have to be very cognizant of that as we support our partners in their work.
So you're saying both the ownership of technology, because it can be attractive to things like thieves, etc., but you're also saying much more important, more fundamentally still, the very nature of the work being done is threatening to powerful commercial interests, whether that's in the private sector, like you said, mining, logging, etc.,
Yeah.
or whether it's in government or
Yeah.
parastatals, etc.
And I would say commercial, but illicit and illegal behavior. That is, I mean, we're talking gangs, we're talking all kinds of things.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to make a move to the second pivot. It's just a one question, but something that I, as a board member, have been interested in. And that is that, so in the last 5 years, Cadasta has, especially in the last 3 years, perhaps roughly, has positioned itself as an ally organization to Indigenous peoples governed organizations that focus on land, tenure, land rights, etc., and other forms of, you mentioned, for instance, Afrocentric community-based organizations. So in this approach, Cadasta still plays that kind of a version of an intermediary role, right? Which is what, as you know, has become more and more under question for NGOs to play an intermediary role. But it positions itself in a different relationship vis-a-vis, for instance, Indigenous people run and governed organizations. I am curious what, from an organizational habits, behaviors, and practices perspective, what did that mean to aspire to become an ally organization?
That is a really good question and very timely when we talk about localization and power shifting and all of that. For us, I from the very beginning, Cadasta is a technical service provider, and we don't consider ourselves a direct implementer, number one. So we are catalyzing this work with our partners. And as a result of that, we see them as our peers. They're our peers. They're experts in their space. They know the land laws. Um, they know the legal context for the most part. They understand the culture and the conflicts and the situation locally, the different peoples, the languages, and all of that. So they're experts. In fact, I have to say, some of the Indigenous alliances that we work with, their budgets and their staffs are way bigger than ours, right? So it's not a it's not a we try to downplay the power relationship and really focus on a peer relationship. Tons of local knowledge, tons of, in the case of Indigenous peoples, ancestral knowledge around land and their territories and everything it does to steward that. We can't even begin to understand the kind of knowledge and depth that they have. And so that's how we think about that. And so in our case, it's, how are we enabling their work? How are we enabling their projects, their aspirations, and their plans to secure land tenure rights? It's on the top of the list of many of these community held lands around the world, whether they're Afro descendants, Indigenous, or other local communities, as securing tenure rights is pretty much at the top. They need help doing it. That's what we're there for. So we focus on upskilling their capacity in GIS and tech use and the tools and all of that. They have capacity in tons of other things. Again, we're complementary to them. We're there to complement things that they need, and we learn a lot from them. I will say one of the things we do is a GIS assessment tool where we assess partner organizations. We assess with them, together with them, 7 different areas, things like, what is the hardware they use, the software, how sophisticated is their data management systems, all of, things like that. And we're able to assess before and after, and we can show how that capacity changes. And another piece there is, and I think this is really important as an intermediary organization, as a partner, as an ally, when we can access funding to support their work, and we get that funding directly, we do a couple different things. Number one, we co-design. We're co-designing. It's their projects, but we're co-designing it in the sense of, okay, what's the scope? What's our timeline? What are the, where are you going to work? Which communities are going to work with? How much land do you need to map? How many users do you have? So kind of that co-design piece, so that it is really their project, right? It's not our big project, it's theirs. Secondly, we also approach it as taking on some of the risks associated with managing donor funds. So, a lot of these communities are, and the partners that support them, in some cases, they're rights holder organizations like Indigenous alliances and so on. It's they talk a lot in meetings about, and conversations that I've had about how the Western world sort of forces them to comply with all the rules and regulations and compliance of taking on these grants, including grant writing and budgeting and all of these things. And so we sit down with our partners and we do it with them, and we take on a lot of that piece of it. So when we put in proposals and then when we get the funding, we're responsible for the reporting and the financial management and the compliance and all the rules and regulations that need to be followed. So yes, we do take on some of that risk. And the third thing is we share the funding. So we are channeling direct funding that we get into our partners, for their field operations, transportation, travel, training, equipment, things like that. And so those are kind of the big ones: co-designing, taking on some of the risk, and then also sharing in the resources and through subgrants or whatever, so that we're working together.
Interesting. Okay, now I'm going to make a really hard turn into, in more than one way, into another pivot, and that is, let's just, for the last couple of minutes of this interview, because we cannot fully ignore it, dive into a big challenge right now. This is the last day of January 2025, just to notice that in case you listen to this at some point in the future. So under the new Trump administration, there has been a total pause in USAID funding, right? It's quite the shock to the system. At least for the next 90 days, if not longer, we will not know what will happen, what will be unfrozen, what will not, what will never come back, etc. It's a total shock to the system, even if it wasn't really a surprise. So how does a small organization like Cadasta try to absorb this type of shock? How does it try to pivot, replan in the face of such big events totally outside of its control?
That's a great question, Tosca. And we are a small organization with a globally dispersed team. We have projects right now in about 25 countries. So, we're, even for a small organization, we're quite broad. And I'll just, for point of reference, right now, over the last 7 years, we've documented the rights of 7 million people on our platform, over 6,500 communities in 50 countries, working with 110 partners. So just to give you a sense of the scope, but with a very small team.
Yeah.
So for us, there's so many things that could be said about this time, and the chaos and the disruption and the
Mm.
anguish, of leaders. I've been sitting in many meetings in our sector of CEOs, of leaders in the sector who have huge operations, hundreds of millions of dollars, $1 billion of operations that they're trying to manage around. So in some ways, as a smaller organization, we've got fewer moving parts, but the impacts on our smaller budget are, significant. So
Yeah.
with regard to pivoting and to sort of how do we approach this? I mean, I think the first thing to say is keeping a cool head. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of emotional responses that a lot of people are having in the chaos and the confusion, the anger, all of the things that come when something like this happens, when it's kind of an earthquake. Kind of keeping a cool head and trying not to make decisions while under emotional influence, if you will. So let's just say keeping a cool head for decision making. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't go off to the races without gathering as much information as possible. That's number one. Number two is, I think, communicate transparently and as often as possible. We have been experiencing daily updates, hour by hour, even in some cases. We just got 2 stop work orders today for 2 of our major programs, and got one earlier in the week for a somewhat smaller program. So, the first thing is talking, how do we take care of our staff? How do we communicate to our staff? How can we be as transparent as possible, and yet without ringing alarm bells? How do we just sort of share what we can and what we know, and let them know that we'll be sharing as things develop? So that's another one. And then I think also, we are part of a coalition of organizations under this group called Unlock Aid. Cadasta has been involved in that for a while. It's mostly social innovation organizations that are smaller, that are delivering social innovations in the field with in 1 or more countries. And this coalition has been really pushing on sort of a list of ways that U.S. development and mostly development aid could be more effective and more efficient. And more responsive. And so part of our thinking is, in the midst of all of this chaos and managing to protect people as best we can, knowing that we're going to have to make hard decisions that, are out of our control, but also thinking through, are there opportunities here for organizations like ours who can, deliver clear results, that can pivot, be agile in the way that we make these pivots, that can point to innovation and results in the field, and be able to make an argument that that is good for the U.S. taxpayer, that is good for our foreign aid, that is good for the people on the ground and the groups that we work with, and the people who are the clients or beneficiaries of that work. So I think that all of our colleagues could agree that there have been some much needed changes that have needed to happen. We just didn't want it to happen like this, but it is happening like this. We've got to deal with it. And so then the question becomes, where are the opportunities in this potentially? As
Yeah,
aid gets dismantled and hopefully to some extent rebuilt and maybe in a different way, there are elements and groups out there pushing for new ways of doing this work. And I think that Cadasta is very aligned with that.
I see. So in other words, if I'm simplistic in stating is this crisis, which it really is maybe also an opportunity for desirable and, to use an overused word, intentional change that could be good or at least better in the medium term.
Yeah.
If I can,
Yes, and I do want to also say I'm not really talking about humanitarian aid right now. I'm talking mostly about development.
yeah,
Humanitarian aid is a whole other story, and I don't want to, that is critical life-saving work. It is urgent. It is something that we don't want, to stop at all,
yeah,
or, and I think there has been a waiver, but I think there's still a lot of confusion there. So by no means am I saying, yeah, am I sort of condoning or agreeing with the methods? I guess I'm saying that this is what's happening. How are we as an organization going to lean into our mission? How are we going to lean into our partnerships? And, frankly, the messaging that land and property rights are foundational to a prosperous, thriving society that is less dependent on aid.
yes, of course.
And
And it's
that's
also,
that's part of our message.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, with that, kind of artificially, abruptly, we need to bring it to a close because there's so much that we just opened up in terms of that I did. Uh, you and I talked about it. We said we do have to touch upon this now, but it's not the core of this discussion. So I'm going to ask you finally, Amy, if people want to learn more about Cadasta, but also about you as a leader, where do you want to steer them?
So about Cadasta, we have our website, cadasta.org. We are also we're on Blue Sky. We are on Facebook still. We have a LinkedIn page. So please look us up there. For me, as far as learning more about me, LinkedIn is the best place. There, I have my background, my profile. I have articles, thought pieces, interviews that I've done. Not a lot, but some of it's there. And I welcome feedback and support and just, yeah, solidarity among your listeners. I think a lot of us are in the same boat, but not all are. Some are not in the U.S. So,
Exactly.
um, and I think also just having empathy with the situation. There's a lot of people who are hurting, and being in
Yes.
solidarity with each other is really important.
It's really important, yeah, and just pointing out the absolute kind of cruelty also of what is happening in this moment. So, well, deep sigh. Thank you, Amy, for all your insights that gave us so much food for thought. Thank you, listeners. If you found this podcast stimulating, then be sure to check out some other episodes on the podcast. We have some interviews with innovation coaches, whether it's about tech or not, that it's about the principles of innovation in the social good sector. So check those out as episodes on the podcast. There are provocative blog posts on my website, fiveoaksconsulting.org. That's with the number five. And did you know that our YouTube channel also offers content as well? One of the things that you will find on my website as well is an offer. But if you've been wanting to have an advisory call with me, but you don't have the budget right now, especially during this time of chaos, or the time to engage in a longer consultation process, my website also offers one-off advisory calls with me directly through the website. That again is fiveoaksconsulting.org. And furthermore, I want to say subscribe to my website, to my email list, so that you always will be the first to be in the know. And with that, I am saying goodbye and see you next time on NGO Soul and Strategy.